Very possible that the suspects believed that having the two deadlines was critical to their success.
I don't know anything, so I don't know.
Yeah.
That it's because she's my mom, and somebody thought, oh, that girl, that lady has money, we can make a quick buck. I mean, that would make sense, but we don't know. But yeah, that's probably, which is...
The FBI has a technique. It doesn't involve surveillance vans, DNA labs, or warrant applications. It involves a camera, a microphone, and a family member willing to sit in front of both. And when it runs in broad daylight on national television, while an entire country watches and never notices what's actually happening on screen. On March 25, 2026, one of the most recognized faces in American morning television sat down for what the world believed was a grief interview. Savannah Guthrie, NRBC Today Show.
No. We don't know anything, so I don't know.
Yeah.
That it's because she's my mom, and somebody thought, oh, that girl, that lady has money, we can make a quick buck. I mean, that would make sense, but we don't know. But yeah, that's probably, which is...
And at that moment, the closest living link to an active federal investigation that had already consumed 8 weeks, $1.1 million in reward money, and 0 arrests. Her mother, Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, was taken from her home in the Catalina foothills outside Tucson, Arizona, in the middle of the night. No shoes, still in her pajamas, gone before sunrise, and as of that broadcast, still missing. What the audience saw was a daughter in pieces. What was actually airing was a law enforcement operation. This is the true crime documentary that the news cycle never finished building, because every outlet that covered that interview reported the emotion and moved on. Not one went inside the architecture underneath it. The specific disclosures, the deliberate language, the coordinated timing, and the invisible audience it was all aimed at. A former FBI special agent, a man who built federal case strategies and ran this exact playbook himself, went on record and used one word to describe what aired that morning: orchestrated. That word changes everything about what you think you watched. And by the end of this, you will never read a family interview in a major missing persons case the same way again. For decades, the FBI has used a specific strategy inside major kidnapping investigations. It has a name inside the behavioral science community that informs federal case planning: strategic victim humanization. The mechanics are straightforward. When investigators have built a theory strong enough to aim at but not yet strong enough to arrest, they identify the most powerful public voice connected to the victim. They approach the family. They align on timing, platform, and message. And then they broadcast it to the largest audience they can reach, not because they're hoping a stranger calls in a tip, because they know the suspects are watching. The man who confirmed this publicly is not a commentator. His name is Harry Trombitis, former special agent FBI, a man who ran federal investigations, constructed case strategies, and made the exact decisions being described here. What goes public, when it goes public, and why. When the Savannah Guthrie 3-part Today Show interview aired, Trombitis didn't watch it the way the rest of the country did. He watched it the way a technician watches someone else run a play he has personally run before. He told Yahoo News the timing was almost certainly not coincidental. He said the interview was coordinated, his word, between the Pima County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, and the Guthrie family. A 3-way agreement on timing, content, and message, and then he laid out 3 specific goals he believed the broadcast was designed to accomplish. First, humanize Nancy Guthrie as a person. Second, keep the case visible and reach Americans who still hadn't heard it. Third, and Trombitis said this without hedging, persuade the suspects to do the right thing. That third goal is the one that reframes everything. Not a potential witness, not someone sitting on partial information. The suspects. People the investigation had already identified or strongly connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. People who were watching that broadcast. And the goal wasn't pressure. It wasn't a trap designed to spook them into making a mistake. It was softer and more precise than that. Do the right thing. That is moral language. That is conscience language. That is the language of an appeal aimed directly at a human being who already knows exactly what they did. and is sitting somewhere with that knowledge and a choice still in front of them. In a separate interview with 10 TV out of Columbus, Trombitas went further. He described what investigators understand about how suspects consume media coverage in high-profile cases. They are not casual news watchers. They are monitoring. Every press conference is data. Every family statement is processed like an intelligence report. What has been confirmed, what's still being withheld, how close the investigation actually is.
Line with that. And again, you walk a fine line, like how much information you release. And, sometimes, releasing some information like that may actually lead to some tips and things. People will say, well, somebody was just in here, asking for that particular kind of medication. And
Trombitas said investigators know this, and they use it. The public broadcast runs on 2 frequencies simultaneously, one aimed at the general audience, one aimed at a room that has never publicly identified itself. And then he said something that requires full attention because it carries more weight than it appears to on first read. He said he knows this strategy works because he ran it himself. His exact words, "We'll hold a press conference or we'll orchestrate something." Orchestrate. He chose that word deliberately. This is not a grieving family being given space to speak. This is a strategy to being executed. There is a plan. There is a message. There is a specific target. And understanding what orchestration actually means inside an active federal investigation is what separates surface-level true crime coverage from what this documentary is doing. It does not mean the FBI scripted Savannah's sentences word for word. It means decisions were made. About timing, about platform, about which details to disclose publicly for the first time in that interview, and which ones to continue holding back. It means the language Savannah used when she looked into that camera was not accidental. It was chosen. And every choice pointed at the same invisible room. That is what Trombitas is describing. And every detail that followed, every specific disclosure, every deliberate phrase, every piece of information is surfacing publicly for the first time reflects those decisions. Every other outlet that covered that interview treated it as a grief document, a daughter in pain speaking for the first time. That reading is not wrong, it is incomplete, because underneath the grief is an architecture, and inside that architecture every element is doing something specific, speaking past the cameras, past the sympathy of strangers, directly to a specific person about a specific thing they already know. The surface is grief. The substrate is an active law enforcement operation. And the only way to understand why that interview aired when it did, in the format it did, with the specific details it contained, is to go inside what it was actually trying to accomplish. That is exactly where this is going. The interview has 4 embedded messages, each one operating beneath the emotional surface, each one aimed not at the general audience sitting at home with their morning coffee, but at a specific person watching from somewhere else entirely. To understand what each message was doing, you have to stop reading the interview as a grief document and start reading it as a transmission. Here is what was transmitted. The first message is the backdoor detail. During the interview, Savannah disclosed something that never appeared in any prior public reporting. When her family arrived at Nancy's home the morning she was reported missing, the back doors were propped open. The family initially assumed a medical emergency had occurred overnight, that paramedics had responded in the dark and left the doors open behind them. They called every hospital in range. No record, no ambulance, no admission. The assumption collapsed.
We thought that she must have had like some kind of medical episode in the night, and that somehow, the paramedics had come because the back doors were propped open, and that didn't make any sense. We thought maybe they came and there was a stretcher and they took her out the back.
Trombitas, speaking to Yahoo News after the interview aired, confirmed this detail was new to him too. And he immediately raised the question that changes the weight of it entirely. Did Nancy prop those doors open herself, or did the people who took her? Given her physical condition, the idea that she propped them open herself is not credible. Those doors were the exit point. Someone prepared them before or during the removal. Now ask the real question. Why was that detail included in this interview at this specific moment? It carries no emotional weight for a general audience. It doesn't deepen sympathy. It doesn't make a viewer grieve harder for Nancy. It is an operational detail about how the removal from that house was physically carried out. It was placed in that broadcast because someone watching already knows the answer to Trombitas' question. They know whether those doors are propped open by Nancy or by them. Hearing Savannah describe it on national television, without accusation, without judgment, just the plain fact of it stated where they could hear it, that is a signal. We know about the doors, the family knows, and now the country knows. That detail is no longer contained. The second message is the mobility detail. Savannah described her mother's physical condition with a level of precision that went beyond what grief alone required. On a good day, Nancy could walk to her own mailbox. Most days she could not. The back injury was severe. The chronic pain was constant and significant. She could not have left that house on her own under any circumstances.
Wander off.
This isn't that case that you are used to where someone wanders off. She can't wander off. My mom, she was in tremendous pain. Her back was very bad. She was trying to, on a good day, she could walk down to the mailbox and get the mail, but most days not. So there was no wander off.
On the surface, Savannah is putting to rest the early narrative that Nancy may have wandered off. That theory had circulated in initial coverage and it needed to be buried. Understood. But this detail carries a second function entirely. Anyone who took Nancy Guthrie knows exactly how frail she was. They were there. They know what was required to move a woman in that level of physical pain in the middle of the night. They felt the reality of it in real time. Savannah describing her mother's condition publicly, with that precision in that format to that audience, puts a name and a weight on knowledge that only one category of person actually holds. It says, "My mother was in tremendous pain. Whatever happened inside that house happened to a woman who could not walk to her own mailbox. If you were there, you already know that. You experienced it directly. And now, the rest of the country does too." That is targeted weight. That is the strategic humanization Trombitas described, applied not to a general public, but aimed with precision at the specific individual who was inside that house with Nancy that night. The third message is the image. Savannah described waking in the night and imagining her mother's fear. She looked directly into the camera and said she cannot imagine that being what Nancy saw standing over her bed. She could not complete the sentence. She did not need to. The image itself does the work. An 84-year-old woman, severe mobility limitations, waking in the dark to a masked figure standing at her bedside. That image is among the most viscerally disturbing things a human being can be asked to hold. And Savannah placed it, deliberately, precisely, on the most watched morning program in America. This is the most emotionally targeted element of the entire broadcast. It is not aimed at a viewer who needs to imagine the scene. It is aimed at the person who does not need to imagine it at all. The person who was in that room, who stood there, who made that choice, who watched what it did to a woman who had no ability to defend herself and nowhere to go. Savannah didn't reference evidence. She described the experience, the specific, intimate, irreversible experience of what it felt like for Nancy to wake up to that moment. And by describing it on national television, she ensured that the person who lived it on the other side of that moment could not watch the broadcast without being placed directly back inside that room. That is not grief coverage. That is a precision instrument. The fourth message is the direct address. 6 words, placed near the close of the interview. Not the most emotional line in the segment, not the most quotable moment for the news cycle. The operational core of the entire broadcast. Someone needs to do the right thing. Notice what those 6 words do not say. They do not say come forward. They do not say contact law enforcement. They do not say turn yourself in. They say do the right thing. That language carries a specific and embedded assumption that the person hearing it already knows what the right thing is. It assumes prior knowledge. It assumes moral capacity. It is not addressed to a stranger who might have seen something from a distance. It is addressed to someone who does not need the situation explained, only whether to act on what they carry. Trombitas confirmed this framing on the record. He said the goal of the interview was to persuade the suspects to do the right thing. Those exact words. The alignment between Savannah's language and Trombitas' description of the broadcast's intent is not coincidence. It is coordination. That was the message. Those were the words selected. That was the moment chosen to deliver them. And if you watched that interview and felt those 6 words land differently than everything around them, your instinct was reading something real. To understand why the FBI builds strategies around family media appearances, you have to understand what behavioral science has consistently found inside high-profile criminal cases, and the finding is this. The people responsible for the crime consume media coverage of that crime with an intensity that sets them apart from every other viewer. It is not casual interest. It is not morbid curiosity. It is active monitoring. They need to know how close investigators are. They track what has been confirmed publicly, what is still being withheld, what the family knows, and how law enforcement is characterizing the evidence at any given moment. Every press release is information they receive and process. Every public statement is data they file. Federal investigators understand this. And it transforms every public broadcast into a two-channel transmission. Channel 1 runs to the general public, seeking witnesses, generating tips, keeping the case alive in the national conversation. Channel 2 runs directly and specifically to the room that has never identified itself. Same broadcast, same words, two entirely different receptions. The reason a family member rather than a sheriff delivers the core message is rooted in that same behavioral science. A law enforcement press conference produces a specific response in a suspect, threat assessment. How strong is the evidence? How close are they? What have they actually confirmed versus what are they implying? The suspect processes it like a risk calculation, analytical, cold, self-protective. A daughter on television produces something fundamentally different. It bypasses the analytical mode entirely. It goes straight to the part of a human being that knows what they did. Not the part running calculations, but the part that has to wake up every morning and exist inside the full weight of a deliberate choice. The part that cannot be reasoned away or strategized into silence. Trombitas described this directly. Anytime you go before the public and describe what kind of person was taken, what a devoted mother she was, how deeply she was loved, it humanizes her. And humanizing the victim does two things simultaneously. It builds public sympathy, and it places a living, breathing human being in front of a suspect who may have already begun processing the victim as a problem to be managed rather than a person they wronged. That is the science. Now look at who it was aimed at. The physical operation that removed Nancy Guthrie from her home was not spontaneous. Trombita said plainly, he firmly believes a minimum of 2 people were involved. Controlling a woman with severe mobility limitations in the middle of the night is not a one-person undertaking. This required coordination. It required a plan. The person captured on doorbell camera footage arrived at Nancy's property knowing exactly where that camera was positioned and how to approach the house while staying out of its optimal field of view. At 1:47 in the morning, the camera was disabled. 41 minutes later, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker lost its Bluetooth connection to her phone. Her phone was found inside the home. The pacemaker going offline 41 minutes after the camera went dark means she was removed from that property inside that window. Camera first, then Nancy. That sequence does not happen by accident. That is a planned order of operations executed with enough precision to know exactly what to neutralize first. The investigation also uncovered a damaged utility box near the property, believed to be connected to an internet outage that occurred around the same window of time. Whoever approached that house understood that Nancy's security camera ran on a home Wi-Fi network. They understood the relationship between the network and the system it supported, and evidence suggests they may have cut both before ever setting foot near the door. That level of operational knowledge about a specific residential property in the Catalina foothills of Tucson does not come from a quick drive-by. It comes from one of 2 places: extended prior surveillance or direct personal familiarity with the home. And then came the detail that the news cycle largely absorbed without fully processing. A source confirmed to Fox News Digital that at least one of the doorbell camera images released by the FBI was captured on a date different from the others, suggesting the masked individual visited the property before the night of the disappearance. The Pima County Sheriff's Office disputed the characterization of the timestamps, but investigators asked every neighbor within a 2-mile radius to submit camera footage covering the entire month of January. And they specifically asked the public to focus their memories on the evening of January 11th, 20 days before Nancy disappeared. That date did not surface in public statements by accident. Law enforcement does not request a full month of neighborhood footage without a reason to believe the relevant activity began long before the night of February 1st. If someone was near that property on January 11th, mapping camera positions, identifying the utility infrastructure, timing the neighborhood patterns, studying the entrance and exit points, then the decision to take Nancy Guthrie was not made in the final days of January. It was made earlier and acted on with enough discipline to wait, to observe, to return, to hold the plan until every condition did aligned exactly right. That kind of patience is not random, it is not opportunistic, it is personal, it is motivated, and it points directly at the type of person a former FBI agent is referencing when he describes the goal of a nationally broadcast interview as persuade the suspects to do the right thing. You do not appeal to the conscience of a random opportunist who stumbled into a situation. You appeal to the conscience of someone who planned this over weeks, who thought about it deliberately, who made a sustained and calculated decision, and now lives every day inside the full weight of that choice. That is who Savannah was speaking to on March 25th. The profile sharpens further when you factor in motive. Savannah said it herself during the interview. She fears her mother was taken because of her visibility, her platform, and the assumption made by whoever planned this, that a famous daughter meant a cooperative family, a family with resources, a family with a powerful incentive to resolve the situation quietly, rather than let it escalate further. She turned to her brother Cameron during the interview and asked him directly, "Do you think it's because of me?" Cameron Guthrie is not a man who softens assessments to protect feelings. His background is military intelligence and combat aviation, environments that train a person to read threat situations accurately and fast without the filter of what someone wants to hear. His answer was immediate. Yeah, maybe. He meant it. If that framing is accurate, and investigators have neither confirmed nor denied it publicly, then the people who planned this spent significant time studying the Guthrie family before they ever acted. They understood the connection between the anchor at 30 Rockefeller Plaza and the 84-year-old woman living quietly in the Tucson foothills. They mapped the leverage. They made a calculation about what a famous daughter would do when the pressure was applied to the person she loved most. They were wrong about the outcome, but the calculation itself tells you something critical about how close these individuals were to this family's world, and how much they understood about it before they ever approached that house. Now, add the gloves. Most true crime coverage of the gloves recovered near Nancy's property framed the DNA result as a dead end. The glove appeared to visually match what the suspect in the doorbell footage was wearing. It was tested. It traced back to a local restaurant worker with no connection to the case whatsoever. The coverage moved on. But the elimination reveals something that matters. Not about who did this, but about how they think. The suspect was wearing gloves before they left for that property. They planned to wear them. They understood that any skin contact with any surface inside or outside that house was a forensic liability, and they managed it in advance. And the gloves that ended up near the property, the ones that generated the news cycle, did not belong to them. Their gloves were not left behind. In an operation that involved disabling a security camera, propping open a back entrance, and removing a person from her home in the middle of the night, the individual responsible did not leave their gloves at the scene. That is not a lucky break. That is operational discipline. That is someone who thought carefully about exposure before they moved and managed it. Then there are the ransom notes. They were not sent to the Guthrie family. They were sent to media organizations, TMZ'd, local Tucson stations. Demands routed through news outlets rather than delivered through a direct and private transactional channel. Sending a demand to TMZ is not the behavior of someone primarily motivated by collecting a payment. A demand sent to TMZ gets reported. It gets amplified. It gets analyzed across every platform simultaneously. It forces law enforcement to respond publicly, rather than manage a situation quietly behind closed doors. It creates chaos and pressure on a national scale, while keeping the sender one full layer removed from direct negotiation. Trombita said the ransom motivation is appearing less and less credible to him. Not because the demand wasn't made, but because the way it was made reveals what this person actually wants. And what they want is not simply a transaction. It is something harder to define and harder to satisfy. It is control. It is the experience of watching a famous family in a federal investigation move in direct response to their choices. Pull all of that together. 2 or more actors, a plan developed weeks in advance, operational knowledge of the property's electronic infrastructure, forensic awareness managed before arrival, ransom demands routed for maximum public impact, a motive tied directly to Savannah's public profile. That is not a profile built around opportunism. That is a profile built around sustained, deliberate, motivated planning. And the interview Trombitas described as orchestrated was not aimed at a stranger. It was aimed precisely at someone carrying that profile, watching carefully from somewhere, monitoring every broadcast, and sitting with a choice that has been available since the night this began. The interview was designed to find the one thing that level of planning cannot fully protect against: the conscience. The part that lives with this regardless of whether the plan is holding. The part that wakes up in the dark and already knows what it knows. The Today Show interview did not stand alone. It was the opening move in a coordinated media week that escalated in scope and reach with every successive day. And when you map the full structure of that week, what looks like a network covering a major story starts to look like something else entirely. March 25th. 3-part interview airs on the Today Show across Thursday and Friday morning. Savannah Guthrie, Hoda Kotb, NBC's core morning audience, predominantly women, 35 to 65, across every major American market from New York to Los Angeles. Then Friday night, March 27th, NBC broadcasts a 2-hour Dateline special titled Savannah Speaks. 2 hours, prime time, the Dateline franchise, the true crime documentary format that has defined the genre in American television for more than 3 decades, and the critical detail that the news cycle glossed over entirely. Standard Dateline content runs approximately 42 minutes inside an hour block, doubling that runtime on a Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for a single unresolved case with no arrest and no identified suspect on record. That is not a network simply covering a story because it's generating clicks. That is a network running a strategy in coordination with the people inside that story. And per Trombitas' framework, in coordination with the investigation itself. Now look at the architecture of those 3 days as a single constructed unit. Thursday and Friday morning. Today Show, reaching the morning audience. The commuters, the parents, the women who drive the daytime conversation in this country. Emotional register, intimate, raw, grief-forward. The interview that seeds the national discussion. Friday night, Dateline prime time, reaching the broader evening audience. Wider age range, heavier true crime consumption, the demographic actively driving the online conversations about this case in real time. Emotional register, investigative, methodical, documentary style. The special that deepens everything the morning interview planted. Different day parts, different viewing habits, different emotional entry points into the same material. The same message delivered twice in 48 hours to 2 distinct but overlapping American audiences. For the specific person or people this entire operation was aimed at, that week was not avoidable. There was no corner of American media between March 25th and March 27th where Savannah's message was not present, not circulating, not being discussed. The operation was not a single broadcast. It was a saturation strategy, designed to achieve total coverage of a specific and visible audience across every available platform and day part, maximum reach, no exit. And then came the announcement that extended the operation indefinitely. Savannah told Hoda during the interview that she plans to return to the Today Show on April 6th. She said it is her purpose right now. She said she doesn't know if she still belongs there, but she wants to try. On a personal level, that is a woman finding her footing in an unimaginable situation. On a strategic level, that is one of the most recognized faces in American morning television returning to daily national broadcast while her mother is still missing. The investigation is still active, and no resolution has been made public. Her daily presence on that desk does not require her to mention the case once. The audience already knows. The culture already knows. And anyone watching who holds information about where Nancy Guthrie is, they know too. They know that Savannah did not disappear from public life. She did not collapse inward. She came back. Every single morning. Every morning she is on that screen. Another morning the reward has not been collected. Another morning no arrest has been announced. Another morning the distance between the suspects and the investigation remains publicly undefined. Her presence is a daily, structural, unavoidable reminder that the question is still open and that the choice is still available. Trombitas confirmed this directly. Savannah returning to Today, he said, would help keep the case in the public eye. What he is describing is a sustained pressure system with no scheduled endpoint. The operation does not close when the broadcast ends. It resets at 7 a.m. the following morning. That is the architecture of a strategy that was built to run as long as it needs to. Now understand what the silence around it means. In the weeks surrounding that media week, investigators went quiet. No major press conferences, no significant public updates from the Pima County Sheriff's Office or the FBI. The reward sits at $1.1 million. $1 million from the Guthrie family, $100,000 from the FBI. Uncollected. The investigation enters its 8th week with no public resolution. Most coverage read that silence as stagnation, a case losing momentum. The news cycle doing what it always does with stories that don't produce new developments on a daily schedule. Trombitas read it differently. He said the quiet and active federal kidnapping investigation is not necessarily a sign the case is stalled. It may mean the precise opposite. When federal investigators go silent, it is sometimes because they are close enough that what gets said publicly is no longer about outreach. It is about management, about making sure the suspects do not sense the ground shifting beneath them before investigators are in position to act. The silence is not absence. It is strategy. The same strategy that shaped every word of the interview, every disclosure calibrated, every public statement weighed, everything placed in the public space for a specific reason. And there is one statement from Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos that received far less attention than it deserved. Speaking to NBC Nightly News, the same week the interview aired, Sheriff Nanos said investigators believe they understand why Nancy Guthrie's home was targeted. Not who. Why. Sit with that for a moment. Knowing why requires understanding motive. Understanding motive requires understanding intent. And understanding intent in a case like this requires understanding who had a specific reason for this specific house, this specific woman, this specific window of time. Not just capability, reason. A sheriff who states publicly that his team understands the why has assembled a theory that goes beyond the physical evidence recovered at the scene. He has moved into the psychology and the relationship structure of whoever made this decision. He made that statement, and then said nothing further. He also said he cannot rule out the possibility that whoever took Nancy could act again. That is not a throwaway line added for public caution. That is a law enforcement official stating on the record that the logic behind this crime is portable. That whatever motivation drove the targeting of that specific house on that specific street in Tucson could apply to another person. That the investigation has identified something about the nature of this motive that makes it transferable. That statement runs on the same operational frequency as the interview itself. It tells the suspects, we understand the logic. We understand why this house. We know why this target. We have built a theory about you that extends beyond the night of February 1st. And if you have not yet fully processed what that means for where this investigation is heading, now you have something to consider. The silence and the interview are not opposites. They are two halves of the same constructed strategy. The silence protects the investigation by keeping its true progress concealed. The interview speaks directly to the suspects in the space that silence creates, delivering a message that no sheriff and no FBI director could deliver from a podium without revealing how much they actually know. Savannah did not raise her voice. She did not accuse anyone. She described a woman of quiet faith who raised 3 children alone after losing her husband when Savannah was just 16 years old. A woman who was funny and a little unpredictable in her humor, who carried her beliefs privately but carried them every day, who never stopped being her children's mother even when they were grown and living lives she could barely have envisioned for them. A woman who viewed her home in the Tucson foothills as the one place in the world that was entirely and completely hers. A woman who was taken from that home in the night, in her pajamas, without her shoes, by the people who came prepared, who had studied that property weeks in advance, who knew exactly where the camera was, what the exit looked like, and precisely how much time they had before the window closed. And then, with the full weight of that sitting in the room, Savannah looked into the camera and said, "Someone needs to do the right thing." That sentence was coordinated. That timing was planned. That broadcast was, in the words of a former FBI special agent who has personally executed this exact strategy, orchestrated. It was aimed at a specific individual sitting somewhere in this country, watching a specific program, carrying the one piece of information the entire investigation needs to move. It was designed to bypass every calculated, self-protective, threat-assessing part of a human mind, and reach the part that cannot be strategized away, the part that wakes up at 3 in the morning, the part that already knows what it knows, the part that has to keep living inside that knowledge every single day. As of this recording, no arrests have been made. No suspect has been publicly identified. No motive has been officially confirmed. The reward remains uncollected. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. But the operation is still running. Every morning, Savannah Guthrie sits at that desk, and the trap stays open. Every morning, the reward goes uncollected. The choice remains on the table. And somewhere in this country, the person or people who walked into that house in the Catalina foothills of Tucson on the morning of February 1st are still watching. They received the message. The question this true crime documentary cannot yet answer, and the question that the investigation is still working toward, is whether they will act on it. When this case breaks, and a case this coordinated, this focused, this sustained is moving toward a break, the January 11th date remains the most underanalyzed detail in the public record. The specific evening investigators asked an entire neighborhood to search a full month of footage to examine. The night 20 days before Nancy disappeared that law enforcement placed into public statements for a reason they have not yet fully explained. If you have come across anything connected to that date, or if something in this breakdown changed how you are reading this case, that matters. Subscribe and stay close. When the next development surfaces, this is where the full picture gets built. This has been a true crime documentary decode of the Savannah Guthrie Today Show interview, and the federal operation that ran beneath it.